Okay, well, maybe we'll just start with just what we'll do is, so we'll start with the mindfulness breathing, the 21, the counting the breath. And what we'll do, we'll discuss the Buddha's words and what he talked about, his understanding of how the world is. And then we'll talk about the mind. And then after the talking about the mind, we will do another kind of meditation on the clarity of the mind. And hopefully then I also will get into a little bit of the lamrim stuff, the stages on the path, and then we'll finish. Yeah? Okay. So let's start with just I don't know. My phone is over there. I usually have the Zazen timer on there. But we'll do 3 minutes um, of just counting meditation. So remember your posture, legs, hands, back, jaw, and mouth and tongue, eyes, neck or chin slightly tucked, elbows like the wings of a bird. And then with every out breath, we count. And the mind should be focused on the breath going in and out. Different people do different things. Some people, it's easy to concentrate on the feeling at the nostrils as you're breathing in and out. Some people focus on the tummy going in and out. Some people focus on the breath, the movement of the breath through the body. Whatever works. The mind will wander, and you just come back to the breath. And then when you're ready, you can come back to the present. Okay. One of the things that one can do, sometimes it's hard to settle into meditation, even, something quote unquote as easy as counting the breath. And one of the, not tricks, but well, tricks of the trade, if you will, is, those of you who have gone to yoga and stuff, about body scan, right? So you start from your feet and you just focus on that section of the body. And, if there's any tension, you breathe into it. And so you work like that up, your thighs and your knees and so on, up, arms and wrists. And then finally you go, all the way, your eyes, your nose, your jaw, which almost always is clenched for us, temples, everything, your neck, right? And if you take about a couple of minutes to do that, it's amazing how much easier it is to concentrate on whatever object that we're trying to meditate on. So that's something that I do. I learned it many years ago. I don't remember from whom, but that works quite well. So you can give it a try. There are other breathing meditations as well, like if you've come to Geshe Sherab, who is our resident teacher, he's touring now, but he's not here right now, but he would do the 9-round breathing, right? So some of you may have heard of it. So we can talk about that later on. So there's another breathing meditation called 9-round breathing that's good for flushing the distracting, whatever, the energies or winds, whatever you want to call it, that are obstacles to meditation, yeah. So, okay. So we spoke about the Buddha's life and a little bit of his search, or not a little bit of what he said, but mostly his search. And so now what we'll talk about is what's the conclusion he came to, right? He'd been searching for so many years, and finally he came to an understanding of the nature of the world and how things are and how things function, our place in it, and how to transcend, right, the worldly nature that we have and have, if you will, eternal peace. And yeah. And the good thing or whatever, the value of that in a way is that it has been a tried and tested method for 2,500 years. So you don't have to take the Buddha's word, right? You don't have to take my word, certainly. But you can, even now, come into the presence of those who have been following that path and who embody you can see in them, if you're around long enough and you seek out those people, those beings, you will find that they're practicing on this path, basically, they have reached the culmination, if you will, right? So it's not like enlightenment is something for other people or something that's far away from each of us, right? It depends on how much effort we're trying to putting in and how much sincerity, et cetera. But it's actually each of us, the Buddha's doctrine says each of us will actually, for certain, become enlightened one day. I mean, that's a given, right? Because each of us has the Buddha potential. The question is how quickly or how slowly do we get there, right? And that's really what the Buddha's words, if you follow the Buddha's word, if one follows the Buddha's words, then it goes faster. That's really all it comes, what it comes down to, right? But if you see videos of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who is, the second, I mean, Lama Yeshe as well, but there aren't that many videos of him, but Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you will see, you can, I mean, I've been in his presence many times, and he was my teacher who gave me instruction, and many, so, and you can just see, and so they're an inspiration to us, and even now, right? And so you don't have to take what it says in the sutras as, you don't have to take it as gospel. You can see these people and talk to them and see what they're like. And some of them visit and, teach and so on, right? They're not really that far away. Anyway, so the Buddha's, so he distilled it down to what's known as the Four Noble Truths, right? The truth of suffering, the truth of cessation of the suffering, truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the cessation of the suffering, and then the truth of the path to liberate oneself from the suffering, right? And the question, first of all, is, the first is actually difficult, not difficult, but it's a deep question. Are we really suffering, right? What does suffering mean, right? So he talked about the truth of suffering. Old age, sickness, death is the classic examples of suffering, right? But I have a question for you, all of you, I guess, do you think you are suffering? There's no wrong answer, by the way. So, yeah. I mean, does it feel, do you feel you're suffering?
It's kind of how you said earlier, it's that roller coaster, right? So yeah, you kind of transition in and out of it. So
you're saying you're transitioning in and out of it during the day because of the example I used about hunger and so on. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else?
I take it to mean it's just part of the human condition of our, default mode network and our evolutionary psychology to be wary and nervous and anticipate things that can go wrong and be reactive.
Okay.
As a, evolutionary psychology tactic.
So, Dave said that it's part of human nature, and probably comes from evolutionary psychology of us having to survive and survival instincts and being always look out for danger and fear and worry and all that. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
When you ask the question, that's a good question, maybe you should think, but my immediate response, my gut response was no.
Your gut response is no, you're not suffering. Tell me what that means.
I think if you asked me that maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago, maybe never thought of it, but I could identify certain sufferings, but suffering in my understanding today, where I'm at, my experiences, is the result of attaching yourself to something unrealistically. So you suffer a heartbreak. My mother passed away. But was I suffering? She suffered.
Okay.
Not me. And I was able to walk her through that and live with that through. So there was pain, I guess, and it hurt, but suffering's a pretty heavy duty word. So
okay.
I feel like I'm being tortured every day.
All right.
So my immediate response is no.
Okay. So David's immediate response is no, because there are things have happened, like his mother has passed away, etc. And there was pain involved in that. And Dave.
I'm David, he's Dave.
Okay. My apologies in advance, which David and Dave I mess up, but okay.
David.
You're David. David. Okay, David. So he said, so his mother passed away and he helped her through the process. So there was pain involved and she suffered, but but doesn't feel like suffering. Yeah, okay. That's a heavy word, he said. So, anyone else or no? No, okay. Okay. So I'll give you it's interesting, right? So in the old days, back at Buddha's time and even 100 years ago, right? Old age, sickness, death, and food on the table was a very immediate, food on the table especially was a very immediate thing, right? I mean, suffering was pretty obvious, right? I mean, suffering is not that obvious to us now because we are, for the most part, removed from most of it, right? I mean, medicine has delayed old age a lot, right? Sickness, we have, we still, the COVID was a big sickness, right? I mean, so there's some big things that happened, but for the most part, our sicknesses are curable, for the most part, etc. Death, though, yeah, that there's no cure for that one. Actually, they say that there will never be a cure for that one, but that's another, we won't go there. So, but the suffering that the Buddha was talking about, I mean, it's certainly all of this, right? So the suffering is a difficult, it's not a correct translation, if you will, of the Sanskrit. I grew up in India, I studied Sanskrit, all that stuff. So the Sanskrit word is dukkha, which is not what we think of when we say suffering. Suffering, you're right. Suffering is a heavy word. It's kind of almost like a Old Testament word, like you think of pestilence and, wars and famines and all that stuff as suffering, right? So it's not but it's the best translation we have. People have tried different translation that hasn't worked, but that's the best one we have. But dukkha means really, it's just this constant sense of not enough or dissatisfaction. I mean, there's old age, sickness, death involved in there too. There's the big sufferings, right? Wars, famines, all that stuff. But also just the constant niggling doubt about, okay, am I doing well enough? Am I good enough? Is this good enough? My life should be better. My children should love me more. I'm bored. I need to watch TV. There's just so many things that are constantly just, I mean, an easy, like a recent example, I went to lunch, right? So I went to my favorite restaurant, well, one of my places, down here locally, Posa's, those of you who know. And, usually I get a good, I asked for enchiladas. They gave me something totally different. I have no idea what it was, but it was awful. I didn't send it back, partly because one of the vows as a fully ordained monk is, back in the old days, again, on the side, back in the old days when you went on alms rounds. I mean, in the Theravadan traditions, in Southeast Asia, they still go on alms rounds, right? So you eat what is given, and you don't ask. If you don't like it, tough. And you eat what is given, and you're happy with it. You're trained to be happy with it, right? So I didn't send it back because I was, that's what's given to me, right? So it's my way of practicing that vow in the modern world, even though I did pay for it and I asked for it, right? But, anyway, so anyway, it was pretty awful, right? So, I was hungry, I was looking forward to the meal, and it was a rather big disappointment, right? I was thinking while I was eating it, it's disappointing. There's disappointment right there. And, so then I thought, okay, I got to get the taste of this out of my mouth. So I'll go get some ice cream, right? I'm still in the kind of honeymoon phase of the ice cream. I'm sure I'll regret it pretty soon, right? So disappointment of the ice cream hasn't kicked in yet. But when I feel a little too full, it will, right? So like that, we just go through these. Our whole day is like that. I mean, you can think about
That's suffering, really.
that's not suffer. Okay, but let me. Okay, yeah. That's an easy example, but but a lot of people get really upset about a bad meal.
But that's not necessarily objective. To me, it's not objective suffering. That's
Okay, it's not objective suffering.
attachment to that particular outcome. But
I'm-
then they exaggerate or
Yeah,
exemplify that,
yeah.
and they make it painfully hurtful.
It doesn't. Well, the thing that you see David's response was that it doesn't feel like that's suffering. You just had a bad meal, and you just go on from there. And it's true. You're right. However, that's a small example of, like, you could think of bigger things like relationships. Like, how many people go from relationship to relationship looking for the perfect person, right? There's many heartbreaks involved in between. There's many disappointments involved in between. There's a lot of mental suffering, right? And that's just a bigger, harder, it's just what's the word I'm looking for? That's bigger version. I can't think of the right word. Bigger version of what I was talking about, right? Is that, we go from one need to another, and we think that need, once we satisfy it, whether it's a relationship, whether it's my lunch, whether it's whatever, right? We think that once we have what we're looking for, it's going to bring us happiness, joy, contentment, whatever it is, right? But somehow that contentment isn't permanent, right? There is yet to find something, a contentment that is permanent, or joy that is permanent. So basically, whatever you want to call it, suffering or otherwise, is the stuff that's most of our life is spent on between the different peaks of joy or contentment, right? I mean, think of all the mental suffering that so many people go through every single day. You know them, I know them, that's, maybe it's not strictly, as a heavy, you wouldn't use a heavy word like suffering, but it is something, right? And the point is that, and okay, so that's the kind of, so there's the big suffering of old age, sickness, death. Old age and sickness is, it's not as big of a deal anymore, but death certainly is. And then, COVID was a huge suffering, right, for all of us, right? So there's the big sufferings, and then there's a continual small sufferings. I mean, that's really what, the Buddha was getting to, right? The mental suffering, you get pissed off at the guy cutting you off, you shout at them, right? You get angry at your boss because whatever, he treated you unfairly, right? Whatever, all the different things, right? And whether or not it qualifies as suffering, regardless, there is mental unhappiness, right? There's unhappiness. Now, the question is that whether or not one can actually truly be happy. Is there such a thing as permanent joy? Right? And that's what the Buddha was looking for. The other part of it, which I haven't, also part of this is this idea of the cycle of suffering, right? Samsara, which is again, there's no English. They use word samsara from Sanskrit because there's no English translation for it. But as we'll see, I mean, if we want to understand, the mind goes from life to life. There is a continuity of mind. It goes from life to life. And we are continually taking, for countless lifetimes, it says beginningless time, which basically means, if you think about it, the way I think about it is, if you think about a billion lifetimes ago, right? That's how many lives. The universe is only, 13.7 billion years old. Not that old, right? So it's a huge number. And what he said was that we have been doing the same things over and over again, life after life after life, because, and this is the cause of suffering now, right? The truth of the cause is because we are deluded into thinking that the world outside us is where happiness lies. We are always reaching outside for happiness. We're looking for another person to bring us happiness. We're looking for a new car to bring us happiness. We're looking for, the next meal to bring us happiness. Pick whatever you want. You're bored, we're looking at the TV to bring us happiness. We go dancing. We're looking for distractions continuously, and we're looking outside for happiness. We have this delusion that things outside are going to bring us happiness, right? And we are attached, and of course, there's the three poisons, they call it. Poisons means like three poisonous attitudes of the mind, if you will. There's attachment, anger, and ignorance. Those are the main, well, there are many others, but those are the three main ones. But the delusions are caused because of attachment, right? Because we are attached to ourselves, right? I'm better than the next person, or I'm bigger than the next person, stronger than the next person, richer than the next person, whatever it is. My wife is bigger, strong, whatever, like that, right? So we have this attachment to ourselves, and then we have this attachment to things, right? My partner, my car, my bank account, my house, my whatever. And the way one can tell whether one is attached or not is, if my bank account goes away tomorrow, will I be equanimous about it? Right? I don't know about you, but I won't. I know that about myself, right? Regardless of whether I have robes or not. There are other things I've been able to give up, as I'm no longer attached to them. But there's some things, for each of us, there's something we're more attached to than others, right? Those are harder to give up. So, security in life, safety, all those things we are extremely attached to. And if they go away, we get quite upset. That's where mental suffering comes in, right? And one way, I remember this struck me when I first heard it. One can say, well, here's an example of attachment, right? Say that I love my partner. And, is that attachment, right? It wouldn't be attachment if there was no self-interest involved. But you can see self-interest involved for the vast majority of cases. I'm sure there's people who have been able to arise out of attachment from, but for the vast majority of us, you can see self-interest involved because if that partner leaves us, we're no longer, love is no longer there. So there is in the love that we have for our partner or whatever, there's self-interest involved in the sense of, I will love you as long as you love me back. If you no longer love me, there are many cases where I will do everything to destroy you. Right? We see that we hear about that all the time, right? I'm not saying this is true for everyone, right? But I mean, you can think about your relationships and so on, and you can see how you felt after someone leaves you, or it doesn't have to be a romantic partner, but whatever, right? So like that, sometimes it's not easy to see, right? But in almost everything we do, there is some kind of attachment involved. Because, well, anyway, we'll get to that. So that's the attachment to oneself and the self that we have and the things outside that we seem have to bring us happiness, right? Because once the partner no longer brings us happiness, it's pretty clear what mental suffering will arise soon. Yeah. So that's the cause. So the cause is attachment, like because of attachment, there's anger also, right? The delusion of anger that creates a huge amount of mental suffering. And anger doesn't mean, by the way, I'm going to like go and stab somebody and kind of anger. It's like this, excuse me. It's like, I mean, just little things that make us angry, right? Like, well, pick the restaurant example, right? I mean, think about people who get pretty darn upset when they don't get good service at a restaurant. In the whole scheme of things, that's not that big of a deal, to be honest, right? All the road rage that we hear about. I mean, we only hear about the ones that are really bad. We don't hear about all the ones, that were not so bad, right? So there's many examples of that. I mean, you can see that in politicians, you can see that in religious leaders, you can see that in people who incite violence, you can see that in racial hatred. I mean, there's so much, there's all that stuff, right? So there's that. So that's anger, attachment, anger. And the ignorance is the catch-all, if you will. It's the basis of all of these problems. There's attachment. I mean, there's 3 poisons that I'm talking about. There's a 6th poison: attachment, anger, ignorance, doubt, jealousy, wrong view. So there's many different ways of explaining this, and there's, other delusions and so on. But underneath it all is this idea that the Buddha talked about is ignorance, which means that it's not just not knowing, which is our usual understanding of ignorance. I'm ignorant of, whatever, laws of physics, say, right? So that's just not knowing. But this ignorance is a little different because this is not just not knowing how I exist, how things exist, how the I is that I'm attached to, and so on. I'm certainly ignorant of that. But I believe exactly the opposite of how it is. So there's this double aspect to it, right? I don't know how I really am, because of which I have attachment, etc. But I have totally wrong conception. I believe I have an incorrect understanding, and I truly believe that to be the truth. There's no other way. right? So that's the idea of ignorance, which is that we are convinced that our perceptions are absolutely correct. That's another way to think about it, right? I mean, think about how much mental suffering has been caused by people just believing that their perception is correct, right? We've done that ourselves, right? On a small level, daily, right? Oh, does that person, it's just that person doesn't like me. We have no idea. That's our perception. But is that the truth? Once you talk to that person actually calmly and openly, it might actually be not usually, quite often, it's actually not the case at all. It was a misunderstanding. But we truly believe in that, right? And that's just a small example. There's bigger examples, right? So, so that's the cause of suffering. The cause is all in our mind. It's not outside, right? Somebody else, cutting me off, that person isn't the problem. The problem is how I view it as an affront to me because I'm interested in my own getting to where I'm going as quickly as I can, right? Because that's the most important thing, right? And that person is stopping me from doing that, right? So it's not out there. He's not the problem. It's just me is the problem. But we don't understand it like that, right? So that's the truth of the cause, right? And then he said that, so then the question is there a way to stop it? And he said, yes, there is a way to stop it once and for all. It's not true that it's actually, human nature. Well, it might be human nature, but it's not that it has to be like that, right? We can overcome our evolutionary psychology, if you will, if that's what, we think is that could be one of the, contributing factors, certainly, in our current but he said, no, you can actually transcend that once and for all. Because, and this is the next one, truth of the cessation of suffering, the truth of the path of suffering, truth of the path to ending suffering. Because if you are able to if you're able to come to the correct view of the world, if you have to be able to attain wisdom, this is the Buddhist wisdom now, not the general wisdom, right? If you're able to attain wisdom, you will find that you are in everlasting joy. You go from what they say is like the Buddhas, and I've seen it with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, going from joy to joy. There is no mental suffering whatsoever, even though the body is in great pain, right? No worries, no anxiety. Pain is there. He can feel physical pain because the senses are there, right? Nerves are there and neurons are there and brain cells are there. He can feel the pain, but that's totally different from mental pain, right? If you think about when we are sick, just with the flu, I remember when I had the flu really badly. I don't get sick very often, but one time, 5 or 6 years ago, I was like in bed for about 2 weeks. I mean, I didn't get out of bed for 2 weeks, right? That's when I started taking my flu shots, really, seriously. But anyway, but until then, I don't get sick. What do I care? You're right, like that, right? But then I got really sick, and I remember what it felt like. I mean, I didn't think I was going to die, but it felt like I was going to die. Like it really felt like it. But and I'm like, oh my God, this is awful, blah, blah, blah. What am I gonna? I was still working at the time. All the things I have to do, and I'm not getting done. And I was a very senior, technical, whatever, computer scientist in my company, and all these worries and all that stuff, right? You know what they are, right? And it wasn't even that bad. It's not like I'm running out of money, or I don't have, I don't have money for medicines, or I'm homeless. I mean, it's none of those things, right? I'm just like, in my bed, nice warm bed, and just suffering from the flu, right? And my mental pain was quite serious. So, so for the Buddhas, the enlightened ones, when they take birth, as they say, they don't, once you're in cessation, when you have ceased suffering, you no longer have to take births, right? You can just, you can continue, your mental continuum continues to, persist in a different plane. Doesn't necessarily have to take form in this, in our world. But the Buddhas do take births. They voluntarily take births because they realize that others are in pain, and so they, from their compassion, they come to this world to teach and so on and so forth, right? So that's like His Holiness Dalai Lama, or the Buddha, or Lama Zopa Rinpoche, or many other, and other teachers I've had. So, for them, you can actually, I don't know if the videos are still there or not. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he passed away year before, 2 years ago, year and a half. I mean, 2 years, 2.5 years, maybe. I don't remember, 3 years, maybe, yeah. So like that, and it was sudden. But before that, like 10 years before that, he had a stroke, quite debilitating stroke, and he was in Australia when it happened, and his right side was paralyzed, right? So as he was in the hospital and was drooling because his mouth, they were trying to feed him, and his mouth would go like this, and all his words were all mumbled, and he couldn't speak very well, and he was in pain, a lot of pain. There was a video of this, and what else? A lot of pain. They were operating on him, I think. There was lots of anesthesia, all that stuff, right? So, and he was stuck in a hospital. Anyway, but you could see in the video that he was just laughing with people. Like the doctors and nurses would come, and he would just do prayers. He was laughing with them. He was just, it was like his body's falling apart, but he has no care in the world, right? He has no fear of death. Like, he's not worried that I'm going to die tomorrow and what's going to happen to me, right? Or my family, or whatever, right? He's not, I mean, all the things that we think about when we're sick or when we're about to face death were just not an issue, right? And you could see that the doctors, and they interviewed, well, not interviewed them, but there was a couple of nuns and monks who were there with him, and so they talked to them, and you could see in the video, and they were just like amazed, right? Because they just hadn't come across someone like him, right? So that's the kind of, so it doesn't mean, like, some people have this misconception that if you're a Buddhist practitioner, you give up, you're no longer suffering, and it just means that you just don't feel anything, right? I mean, you're just, you don't feel any highs, you don't feel any lows, and et cetera, right? What it really is that you do feel lows. You feel lows in the form of compassion. You feel someone else's pain in a really, really deep way, and you want to help them. That's what Lama Zopa Rinpoche would do, right? I've seen him in many instances of caring for an already dead animal, right? So he feels their pain. So there's that low in that sense, but it's not a low like a low for me, right? Like woe is me. That low just doesn't exist. So it's a different kind of low. It's a low coming from compassion, from love, from whatever else that propels them to help someone else, right? And the highs it's a constant high. They're in bliss, they say, right? Because there's nothing, because they have transcended this ignorance, attachment, anger, self-interest, all those things. So when they love somebody and the person passes away, they feel grief, right? But, there's also understanding, there's also equanimity, there's also all the things, right? They miss them, right? They miss their company. But that's not quite the same as, people falling apart when their partner dies or whatever, right? Because they have a purpose in life, right? They have a purpose, which is being of benefit to others, and nothing's going to stop them from that. And so whatever comes, it just doesn't derail them, right? And that's what the joyous perseverance is about, right? I mean, it just doesn't derail them. They don't get discouraged because things aren't working out the way they're supposed to, right? How many times have we gone through that, right? Expectations not met, right? So, so that's the kind of people who have, been practicing the path and who have realized it. And they're definitely around even now, I know some of them, a few of them. And there are many others, I'm sure, we just don't know about them. So anyway, so one way, the analogy they use for this Four Noble Truths is a medicine analogy, right? So the truth of suffering is when we know we have an illness, we're sick, we need help, right? So we go to the doctor and we ask them, okay, what could be wrong? And oh, your blood pressure's too high, this and that. So then they come up with the cause. Well, this is why you're suffering, right? And then the doctor says, okay, but if you take statins and this and that, it'll help you. And that'll stop you from, whatever is happening. And that's the cessation. And if you follow my advice, right? Physical therapy, exercise, diet, and medicines, I guess, right? You'll be cured, right? So it's essentially it's from our worldly understanding, we know what that means, right? And the problem is we don't think we are sick, you see, right? We don't think we're sick. Or that there is a state of unsickness, that is possible to not be sick. And the Buddha said, neither of those things is true, right? Definitely you're sick, and here's why you're sick. And by the way, you don't have to be sick. And so, yeah, so did that make sense? I mean, like, you can ask me questions if you wish. Yeah.
On the sensation, he said this a little unclear.
The sensation, well, I mean, so people think, for example, that if you give up attachment, let's say, well, let me think of an example. As I told you, I'm a violinist and I like classical music. I listen to a lot of classical music when I have time. And I really love it, right? It brings me great enjoyment, right? You could say I'm attached to it, right? Some people think that if you give up attachment, that means like it's basically, you don't have any highs, you don't have any lows. There won't be any joy or sorrow. It's just basically just in flat line, right? That the state you're supposed to be in is this kind of no feeling. But that's not the case, right? You can be a Buddha and, appreciate music or dance or, a flower, or the beach. I've seen them go to the beach, right? And sit in the sun, right? So there's definitely joy there, right? There's definitely liking something, right? It's not that you have to like no longer like anything or dislike anything, right? So it's not that you give up sensations, you give up feeling, you give up all those things, right? It just means that when that thing goes away, there's no reduction in joy, right? They're not disappointed when, it becomes, they were all looking forward to a day at the beach and all you get is thunderstorms, right? And clouds, right? That doesn't reduce their joy. So they basically have this constant just joy. That's really, they go from joy to joy. That's what they say. Regardless of what happens, there's contentment, love, joy, compassion, always. Regardless, like they say, for example, one of the qualities of a Buddha is somebody could be cutting off his right arm and applying scented oils to his left. And he feels the same love for both, right? Or she feels the same love for both. It doesn't, that Buddha basically is in just continual just a love, just love, right? Or compassion or happiness or joy, whatever, right? And you can see in some of these people, difficulties arise in their world, in their lives, right? In their human lives, right? But the difficulties don't discourage them. It doesn't derail them. It doesn't make them question their view lives and worry about what, did I do everything wrong? And what have I spent my life doing? Blah, blah, all those things that we go through, right? Just not there. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm probably not explaining it all that well, but when you come across them, you can see it. It doesn't take, you can feel it. Anybody else have any questions? Jane, if you just raise your hand if you have a question. No? Okay. Is the Four Noble Truths? Oh, yes.
The word cessation and the word sensation in this conversation.
Okay.
But the third noble truth is that there's a way to end suffering.
Right. There is a way to end suffering, and that's a cessation of suffering. Yes. The truth of cessation. And then finally, the truth of the path, which is the medicine, right? And physical therapy. So, I'm not going to go into actually, we need to take a break, but I'm not going to go into the Eightfold Path and so on. Excuse me, right now, but you can look it up and, right view, right livelihood, and, et cetera, how to live, that's the Eightfold Path. But in our tradition, the Eightfold Path isn't, it's built in, but it's not quite, in the Theravada tradition. And actually, That's something we need to talk about. Maybe I'll talk about this when we get back. Just the different, since it is Buddhism in a nutshell and it's an introduction to Buddhism, so I should mention a little bit about the different versions of Buddhism. So maybe let's take a 5-minute break and we'll come back. Is that okay? And for someone like a Buddha, for example, anger wouldn't even arise. It just doesn't arise. Okay, because why does anger arise? Anger arises because someone made an affront, right? To me, right? That's the important part, right? So something inside me arose and became angry because that person hurt me, that person did whatever they did to me, right? But the Buddhas, highly realized beings, they don't have that sense of self, right? I mean, they have transcended. They don't. I mean, that's what I meant by, not. Some people think they just don't feel anything, right? Because they don't feel any anger, they mustn't feel anything at all, right? But that's not the case, right? Anger doesn't arise, neither does it, like attachment. If their partner leaves them, they still love them. They still want the best for them, right? That idea of jealousy or revenge, whatever you want to, whatever, all those things that arise, I want to get back at that person, et cetera, just that never arises, right? But of course, it's a very long process, right? I mean, on the way to that, I mean, there's, it arises a lot, right? But as if you inspect, I mean, all these things arise because we are so attached to ourselves.
So I have a question on attachment, because we're attached, and I think that's something you can't avoid. You're going to be attached to things. But it's how you are attached. Is your attachment secure, or is your attachment insecure? An insecure attachment means you have a sort of you either have a low self-esteem, so anger rises when your partner doesn't do what you want them to do, and you are now angry because your attachment to that partner is one of insecurity. Whereas if you're secure in yourself and you have security, that attachment can really be a lot different. And
Okay.
it's attached into another concept called acceptance, where in psychology, they call it radical acceptance, where you have to really accept what the external world is. So you accept my partner is this way. That's who they are. And my attachment is very secure. So that way you can balance.
Okay. So David is saying that he brought up the ideas of secure attachment and insecure attachment. And I think he said that attachment is something you have. What did you say? Attachment is something you. Okay, you could. Okay, so there is always attachment, but the question is whether it's secure or insecure. Because if your partner leaves you and you are secure in yourself, I think that's the example you used, then it's not.
Well, you can still have heartbreak.
You can still have heartbreak, but you have acceptance and you have. Okay, radical acceptance and so on. Well, what do you all think? What do you all think?
I'm thinking about, the Dalai Lama and his attachment to the security and safety of the Tibetan people. But but that's a victimized group that he leads.
Yeah.
And so how he navigates and how he, teaches
Okay.
sort of a reaction to what is
Okay.
political. And the same with Thich Nhat Hanh and the Vietnamese people, the great Buddhist leaders represent people who have really been attacked.
Okay. So Dave brought up the idea that he's thinking about His Holiness and Thich Nhat Hanh, who lead, people who have lost their, or have gone through great wars or lost their homeland and the distress that they've gone through. Yeah, I don't, what I would say is, I don't know what I can say about secure versus insecure attachment. Or radical acceptance. I do know of the term, but I can't say that much about it. But what I will say is that most of us are not that secure, right? We're not that secure. And the reason, in my understanding, reason we're not secure is that, why is it that we have such low self-esteem, or we go through so much ups and downs and all these things, right? It's because we have this false sense of who we are, right? For someone who's low self-esteem, they have this false sense that they're never good enough, right? Or someone who is very proud or whatever has this false sense of how wonderful or whatever, how big they are or rich they are or whatever they are, right? And when the bubble bursts, because at some point it always does, that's a given, right? They're shocked, surprised, distressed, go through a lot of heartbreak, mental pain and suffering, right? And that's so none of us is particularly secure because we have this false sense. We have built up the sense of ourselves, however it is that we have, right? But it's totally not the correct. That's not really who we are, right? Who we are is a pure being with wisdom, with compassion, and so on and so forth. Except that, and if we were able to tap into that, we would be totally secure in ourselves, right? We would, the outside world, whatever somebody's doing to us, would not be of great import. We'd be able to brush it off easily, right? I mean, that's what I would say. Yeah, I mean, if you want to call it, the Buddhas have secure attachment. I don't know. I'm not a Buddha, so I can't say.
I think it's described it very well. I think it's a false ego, and it's going to just
Yeah.
authentic self. If you're touched with your authentic person who you are, which not a lot of people are, that takes a lot of work. And then you will not have those. You'll still be attached. You will still feel pain and hurt when a loved one dies, or you break up with a romantic relationship. But you see someone hurt, you see an animal get hit by a car. You can still have all.
Well, I mean, you could.
But you're secure. You are.
Right.
So
Doesn't.
you don't then negative emotions.
So if you're secure in who you are, then yeah. So what David was saying was secure in who you are, then you don't react to it in a negative way. Yeah, I mean, the Buddhas are. They don't usually use the word, attachment, because attachment always, well, in the Buddhist world, it has a negative connotation. They use the word love, right? So the Buddha, for example, or Buddhas, there are many Buddhas. The Buddhas, they feel love for everyone the same, regardless, right? I mean, for example, they say that the Buddha loves every being, insect or human, or anything else for that matter, every being as a mother would her only child, right? So it's like infinite love, it's always wanting the best for us, each of us, right? And that love is universal, right? It's not like that person's been nice to me, so I'm going to love him versus the other person, right? So that's one. And then there's, of course, the compassionate side of it, which is that, so love and compassion are different things in Buddhism, right? So love, the definition, I'm like totally off topic now, but anyway, the love in Buddhism, love is defined as taking delight in someone's good fortune. Something nice has happened to that person, you feel happiness. You want good things to happen to the other person. Compassion is wanting to take away the suffering of another person. So it's kind of the dual, if you will. The person is suffering. I want to take away that pain. How can I help that person, right? So the Buddha has this infinite quality of, the quality of infinite love and infinite compassion, always, regardless of who that person or being is. And, or because they've, it's interesting. We think that the more I serve myself, the happier I will be. The more I give myself good things, the more I surround myself with good things, the more whatever it is, whatever is good to each of us, right? The more I get that for myself, the happier I will be, right? What the Buddha says is totally opposite. He says, the less you want for yourself, but the more you want for someone else, actually, the happier you will be. The more you want something for someone else, not by asceticism or restraining, not by saying, okay, I'm going to give up everything, right? That's not what we're talking about. You can keep what you have. There's nothing wrong with it. You have the good fortune. You've created good karma to be wealthy or good looking or whatever it is. You have good friends and good relationship, whatever it is, right? Keep that. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But if you spend your time in being kind and generous and loving and compassionate and wanting to spend time with them, being with them, helping them, whatever it is, right? The happier you will be. And that's the misconception I have. And to some degree, in an empirical way, they are finding that out even through our, the Center for Happiness at Stanford, because I used to live near there, so I know it well. And there's also a group in Duke University. They do a lot of studies like this, right? About what is happiness? What does it mean to be happy? Now, that's not the Buddhist happiness we're talking about. This is the temporary happiness that we were talking about earlier, worldly happiness, right? And they found that, they did the study. This is a Duke one, I think, that came out like 10 years ago. I don't know. So they found that, they did this, they had this scientific, research with placebo, accounting for placebos and, control groups and all that stuff, right? So they had these people who, I think one group was the control. So they just kind of hung around home, One group went to the spa for the Saturday or something like that for the weekend. And another group, I don't remember what they did, but something like, like Habitat for Humanity or something that was out, like helping other people. I don't remember what they did. Maybe they worked in a soup kitchen. I don't know. And what they found was that people who went to the spa, they were happy. They got happiness, right? And the happiness lasted about 2 or 3 days, something like that. And then it kind of tapered off, as we all know it does, right? But, and I don't remember, you can look it up, but I don't remember like how they measured happiness and how they knew within 2 or 3, where the graph goes from, I'm happy to not happy, all that stuff, right? Or that's happiness is gone. I don't remember all the details now. It's been a long time. So so, it lasted for 2 or 3 days. And then it kind of petered out and they were back to their normal self. And then the people who had gone to the soup kitchen or whatever they went, they were above the standard level, the normal level of happiness, if you will, for like 2 weeks. Right. So there, and that was not a one-off, right? There are other studies like that. So they are finding out that, even if we don't accept the Buddhist view, even if we don't believe that the mind is anything different than the brain, et cetera, we are wired as social creatures. We are wired to actually, in such a way that helping others actually brings us more peace and more calmness and more happiness, more whatever you want to, however you define happiness, right? So yeah. Anyway, that's a total aside. So I really didn't get to where I was trying to go, and it's already 10 to 3. So then what we'll do is, okay. So I'll just briefly talk about the mind, and then we will maybe try to do a meditation. So in Buddhism, so we've been talking about the mind. We've kind of been skirting around it, right? The mind, mental suffering, et cetera, right? We'll go into this maybe more next time, but the mind and the brain are not the same. In fact, there's no overlap between the two. Okay. The mind is the thing that allows us, to discern, to have thoughts, to feel. But more than that, it's also the thing that continues. So even though we take many births, our mental continuum is the same, right? So in other words, the mind is the thing that kind of travels from life to life, if you will, right? You may take any different kinds of bodies and have many different kinds of brains, but the mind is not a physical thing, right? That in which you could say, roughly speaking, you have the karmic seeds, the karmic imprints, if you're aware of karma, where, good deeds, if you do good deeds, you create the causes for good results and vice versa, right? And that's a universal thing. The Buddha said, it doesn't matter whether you believe me or not. It's still the case, right? It's kind of like, in Buddhism, it's kind of accepted like gravity. It's a universal law. It doesn't matter whether you believe in gravity or not. It's still going to be there. You're still going to fall from the top of a cliff, right? So karma is like that. And there are many reasons why that if you stick around, you will, there are many, many ways of questioning that and whether karma really exists or not, and many ways of thinking about it. And so far, at least, there's nobody been able to disprove it. Nobody, it's hard to prove it, but nobody certainly has been able to disprove it. As His Holiness, by the way, said, if science comes tomorrow and disproves some basic foundation of Buddhist philosophy, I will believe science. I will change my view, right? So I will do that too. If somebody comes along and disproves karma, I will also change my view, right? But in any case, until then, for many, many millennia, well, 2.5 millennia, and many centuries, people have tried to disprove it. It hasn't worked. And so in any case, so the understanding is the mind is where the karmic, I'm speaking very roughly. Those of you who are watching videos, and if you're watching this later and you say, okay, that guy really, really, really used a simple way of describing it, I am sorry, but in any case, without going into a huge amount of philosophical whatever, let's say for the moment that karma is deposited on the mind. And it goes from life to life, and things happen because of karmic seeds we've created, right? So we could say that we are born in this wonderful country with no material wants and, decent weather in New Mexico and all these other things because, we practiced generosity in the past. Generosity is a cause for wealth. Again, it's the opposite of what we think. We think if we hoard, we will have more wealth. It actually turns out it's the opposite, but that's, or if one practices patience, which is the antidote to anger, then they say one will have, a beautiful body, good looking, right? So like that, there's many other, whatever. And the opposite is, of course, also true. And there is no God well, Buddhism doesn't have a God, and we will go into that next time why that is. There's proof that God doesn't exist. But we can go into that. But nevertheless, there is no God. And so there is no judge. There's nobody judging that, okay, you were bad last time around, this time around, you'll be an insect, right? There's no such thing. It's just the seeds and imprints that we create that, again, like gravity, it just happens, water rolls downhill. So, that is how it is, right? So if you created good seeds, then you'll be born as a human being or whatever, or with a spiritual bent in the next life. If not, whatever, right? So the mind is basically that which goes from life to life. The definition of a mind is that there's two qualities to it, which distinguishes it from anything else. One is clarity and one is knowing, awareness, right? So the mind is, first let's do awareness. So the mind is something that's aware, which means, it can, well, I don't know. How would you define awareness? But, we are conscious. We are, when things happen, we are conscious of it. I guess that's still using the word, but anyway, yeah, I think you have a sense of what awareness means. So I don't need to actually define it. And the other aspect of it is that it's clarity. So the mind is like the mirror. It doesn't judge. It just reflects what is there. Okay. So our mind doesn't do anything other than just what arises, it just reflects it. So the mirror doesn't say you look awful today or you look good today. The mirror just reflects. Something else arises after that puts all the judgment on it, right? And that's our delusions. That's a whole different thing. The mind is not, the basic mind is not deluded, right? You could say that's the Buddha nature, the Buddha potential. It's because we have these delusions that when we see that reflection, other thoughts appear that aren't necessarily, that are either aggrandizing or whatever you call it, right? Self-lowering, loathing, whatever, right? So clarity and awareness, a mirror has clarity. A lake on a still lake, in a mountain, below the moon also has clarity, but it's not conscious. It's not aware, right? Similarly to a mirror, right? A mind that sees if somebody sees, for example, I don't know, a rope, a rope in a dim light and thinks it's a snake, right? That's not a clear mind, right? That's a mistaken mind, right? Because he mistakes this, the rope for a snake, right? So the mind that all of us have, is the Buddha potential, is clear and it's knowing, it knows, aware, like that, right? So and the mind is what gives rise to thoughts, right? Or feelings, intentions, again, on the basis of karma, right? If you have created conditions to arise and always be afraid, then your intention is going to be not the same as someone who is at peace, right? So all those things are governed by karma, right? And karma, in a way, is one way people have teachers have translated habitual tendencies. We know, for example, if we do something often enough, we will continue to do it again, right? We know that because if we've developed a discipline of going to the gym, we will continue to go to the gym, right? Or if we have created some bad habit, right? Like eating, I used to have this bad habit, eating ice cream 3 times or 4 times a week. I will continue to eat ice cream and be very attached to it and crave it, right? So the mind is not that different from that, right? So if we do good things, if we do what's called virtuous things, right, for benefit of others and so on, thinking of others, then we'll create habits. Nowadays in neuroscience, they call it grooves in the brain, if you will, right? But we're not talking about the brain here. But that's an analogy, right? So, we create these habits of doing similar things in the future. And so it kind of builds on itself, right? And if we are constantly trying to find angles, trying to rip people off or trying to take advantage of people, we are going to keep doing those kinds of things over and over again. And people are going to do similar things to us. Like if you see kind and peaceful people don't usually want to rip them off, or be nasty to them. People want to be friends with people who are kind and generous and loving and all that stuff. We can see that, right? So, yeah, so it kind of, so good things kind of keep, it's like a bank account where the interest keeps compounding, right? The beginning, it's kind of takes a long time for $10 to become $1,000, let's say. But once it becomes $1,000, every 4% or 3% interest you get is like 30, right? Before you were getting 3 or maybe, a third of a dollar, right? Now you're getting 30 every single, whatever, month or year, right? So it just kind of snowballs. So it has a snowball effect. Karma has a snowball effect. Whether you're doing good things or bad things, it's neutral to all of that, right? It'll just follow whichever direction you're going. Anyway, so I just wanted to end with them. I don't have time to maybe next time when we start, we'll do the clarity in the mind, we'll remind ourselves of the mind and the clarity of consciousness, and we'll do a meditation on the clarity of the mind. So yeah. Any last questions before we leave for the day? No? No? Okay. Well, let's finish with our dedication again. So, believe it or not, we have actually created good karma, merit, as they say. So whatever merit we have created, may it be of benefit to us, of course, but more that we may use it in a bigger sense for benefit of others. And may we all become enlightened quickly, very quickly. Okay, thank you very much. See you next time, hopefully.